This right here is a graphic that shows the number of police homicides by race and by year. And the red is what we're looking at for 2020, which you could look at 2019 here for kind of full year numbers. Um, and as you can see here, 235 black people in 2019 were killed by police. This is Statista, by the way. So scroll up and look at that. 370 white people were killed by police. Now notice here that like 2/3 of the number of um, police homicides have gone completely unreported, and we're focusing on this small number. Okay, here is the FBI expanded homicide table 6. That you've seen this cited a lot, and I know I'm getting all the angry sighs right now, but we're going to kind of go over this data in detail. Here's the race of the offender, and here's the race of the victim. Okay, so as you can see, and just for some perspective, here's U.S. Census data. Black people make up 13.4% of the population. And yes, I know that's part of the 1350 meme, but we need to go over this because it illustrates a point. Um, but there's a couple points to make from this. First of all, um, white people make up, white alone is 76% of the population. So you'd expect white on white crime to kind of be highest because it's the highest population demographic, um, killing the highest population demographic, right? And then here's your interracial crime statistics. Here is black on white, 514. Now, again, keep in mind, 13.4% of the population is responsible for over 2/3 of the interracial murders. Um, and so remember the numbers we just looked at. Here's 514 for black on white. Here's 234 for white on black. Um, and remember the numbers we just looked at, 370 and 235. So the police homicides are even lower than the interracial. But if you look at this right here, like the number of black people who are both committing crimes and who are victims to crimes is about 50%. See, you'll hear racists bring up 1350, right? 13% of the population commits 50% of the homicides. Okay, but what people don't point out is that black people also make up 50% of the victims. So what am I talking about here? Number one, shut up about police brutality as a race issue. We have a problem with police misconduct, and we know it. But when 2/3 of the population gets zero of the reporting, that's a problem. And yes, I understand proportionality, but there's proportionality here too. So you can't just tell me that the disproportionate number of blacks regarding their population is due merely to racism. We need to look at two components to the race problem if we're going to solve the actual problems. The actual problems that real people are facing, not cultural appropriation like somebody using dreadlocks, not um, somebody not getting hired because they have a funny sounding name, or whatever little petty things people bring up. And I understand there's specific isolated things like sentencing. There could be, there may or may not be some racial component to that. But the important thing we need to start discussing is, what are the underlying causes behind this and behind this? And there's two things. Number one, there is a real problem with police misconduct, and we've seen it. The George Floyd case highlighted it. You had a guy who had no pulse for 2 minutes before they called for medical attention. That's murder. That's murder. Then you had, you had that, but then you had people characterize it as a race thing. They can't just simply talk about something from the framework of police misconduct. Like, we can all agree with that. But the problem is, when you use police misconduct as a front for 235 deaths caused, to ignore the problem of, this is almost 3,000 murdered black people. 13% of the population, 15% of the victim, 50% of the victims. That's the conversation we need to start talking about. We need to start talking about, how do we end poverty for black communities. Like, it just can't be a feel-good thing, like, we're gonna punish the cops. Because, you see, here's the thing. You go and you look back at history, all the way from the slave rebellions, to Reconstruction, to, the pockets of rebellion that justified, that forced armies to remain in the South because the South was trying to impose anti-Reconstruction policies, right? We had to literally have our army down there, and then when Rutherford B. Hayes came in, we removed the troops from the South, and the South started doing the anti-civil rights thing. But the underpinning thing about this was the black violence and retaliation. And at first, there was a cause for it. Obviously, you want to abolish something like slavery, violence is almost inevitable, because you had one group of people who felt strongly entitled to black slaves, and that group of people just flat had to be removed. It was their entire basis for their economy. They had to be removed from that, and yet there's going to be violence from that, especially when they're so emphatic about the right to do that. Okay, that's warranted, but ever since, especially like in the 1950s, you had Malcolm X, you had one group of people, usually, Democrats, especially, it's more clearly defined today, but one group of people egging on the violence, the other people pointing and saying, see, they're violent. We can't trust them to be within our communities. We can't do integration, right? And both of these things are kind of combining, one party versus the other, to oppress minorities, especially black communities. You have the one side egging on the violence, you have the other side pointing to the violence as a justification to segregate. Or basically to ignore the inherent systemic racism that does exist. Right? Neither one of these things serves the black interest. And you had Martin Luther King, who was one of the few who understood it, and initially that was when black life started to improve, was when you had Martin Luther King, say this, you have both groups. Neither group gives a damn about you. This is what you do. You sit in and you force them to be the aggressor. You force them to arrest you. You force them to kick you out of your restaurant. You force them to be the aggressor. You don't act out of anger. You act intelligently with a purpose and you stand your ground. That was the MLK message, and that message worked. That was how we had um, progress between the mid 1960s and like 2000 and such. After that point, you started to see the South start to integrate. But the problem started occurring when you had the South integrating and then you had the North kind of segregating. You almost had a switching of spots. And now it's more segregated than ever with the black communities like being extremely like 80-90% black in a country that's only 13% black. Like, the point I'm trying to make is that we need we need to look at the real data. We need to integrate black communities. And black communities, you guys, you know, you need a reality check. You cannot act out of anger and fury and selfishness and with just a survivalist mentality. You're not going to get what you want doing it. All this feel good stuff that you hear the media pushing on you, like Black Lives Matter and all that, it's not helping you. It is a feel good front that's not going to be sustained after the election. Because if you look at what happened in 2016, that was the start of Black Lives Matter, right? And you had the same. If you look at hang on, let me actually. Here's a little bit of bonus content. I just want to show you more of the word usage right here. Here's activity. And it's a lot more pronounced this year than it was last year. But if you look, I hope I could zoom this in. I guess I can't. Can I? But as you can see, like, it wasn't comparable to how it was now. I guess, like, in July, it's super pronounced. But if you look at, this is July 2016, you had the same kind, not as big of a scale, but a jump in the use of Black Lives Matter. You had a little bit in 2015 too. And then what happened, September, October, November, and after November, Black Lives Matter fell off the face of the earth. Now we get to 2020, again, an election year. What's happening? This is going up. So what's going to happen at the end of the day? They're going to forget about you. This is all about electioneering. Okay? They don't care about you. They don't care. The media doesn't care. Democrats don't care. Even Republicans don't care. Right? Because, again, and it's worth repeating, you got one side pointing at the black community saying, this is your fault. You are causing this violence. Look at them. Look at how violent they are. We were right about them. And then you have the other side, the left, saying, keep being violent. Overthrow your communities. Autonomous zones. Let's get rid of the police. Let's do all this. You have them egging on the violence. Again, nobody wants to help you. Not a damn one of them. Like, you know, the black community needs to start understanding what's happening. This is a front. 235 deaths in 2019. 235, and then you have almost 3,000 murder victims. And yet they want to take away your police over this and not protect you from this. Do you not understand yet how they are against your interest? How they don't give a damn. They don't care. And like I said, neither party cares, but especially the Democrats, because it is a front. It is a front, it is an excuse to keep you down. I urge you guys to listen to Martin Luther King's speeches. I urge you to listen to inner city community leaders talking about the bloodshed of black on black crime, how people are killing each other. I urge you to listen to mid to late 90s rappers who talked about this, because they know and they still know. Because, like, people who are from those communities and were prominent members, a lot of them who have even left, a lot of them will say it, like, what is being presented to you is a front. The BLM, the anger is justified because there is systemic racism, but again, it's directed at a front. It's not directed at the actual issue. 235 deaths versus 3,000 deaths. 2,925 deaths. You guys, you gotta stop being driven by the anger. Yeah, I'm a white boy talking to you, but it's just a reality. Because again, they don't care. They don't care about you. Even if I'm talking from a white boy perspective, you have to understand what these numbers mean. Why this doesn't get reported, but this does. Because it's all a front. It's a lot easier for them to point at one tragedy and get your emotions boiling so that you'll look away from these boring looking faceless numbers. Think about that. Think about that for a second briefly. 2,925 deaths. That's a heavy percentage of that. Let's call it 1,500 deaths maybe for people under 22 years old. That's 1,500 mothers who don't get to see their kids. That's 1,500 mothers who don't get their face plastered all over the media. We've had gold coffins for George Floyd. We've had these funeral processions on television for 3 hours and all that. You've had Reverend Jesse Jackson talking at a podium all over one guy. But look at all these people. We don't even know their names. There's so many of them. And I wish I could get a list of their names. In fact, I probably could, because I believe, like the Chicago Tribune, or there's some publication in Chicago that every weekend they post the names of every person who died from gang violence that weekend, right? And there's like, I think it's between 12 and 20 that die every weekend in Chicago, something like that. But the point is, like, we don't get the names of these people. Like, we don't get their mothers. We don't get their life stories. We don't get, like, what their professions were, their aspirations in life, their political opinions. We don't get, like, how they view life on the streets, or, we don't get their thoughts. And these are thinking, breathing, smiling people. They're just as important. But we don't get their names, and we don't get their names because we get the front. We get the narrative because it's all about maintaining the state of poverty. That's what this is. This is about maintaining the state of poverty by making you think that cops shooting black people is a major problem. And again, yes, police misconduct is a problem, but it's not the problem. It's not the thing that is causing problems within black communities. Like, here's my vision. I want, I don't know, maybe it's just pie in the sky, but what I want is integrated communities where, there are businesses, modern businesses in black communities where we can build new homes, build new roads, get black communities to the levels of white communities, you know, with equal protection from the cops, from both people, and that includes better training. Let's rebuild the schools. Rebuild the schools around the community, not just like, we're just going to build a school in this decrepit community and then expect that school to be any better than the one that was, falling apart. Rip out all the lead infrastructure, like all the old pipelines, and put in modern infrastructure. Keep the roads maintained just like the wealthy neighborhoods. Don't just base everything on property taxes. Let's, like, there's going to be ethnic communities. There's always going to be that. Like, you can't be naive enough to not think that these communities are going to exist. But the thing we just need to make sure that where there's these communities, somebody could go in any of those communities and get a cultural experience, right? You go to a black neighborhood. The black neighborhoods are super nice. The people may have different customs, but like everybody gets to bask in the abundance that is this country. And this country is abundant, but it's not being seen in those communities, and that has to change. But it only changes. We only can even approach something like that. Something that I want just as much as anybody else. We can only approach that when we start to address real problems and not fronts. Because, yeah, the cops are a problem, but you need the cops. Right? It's a necessity. You're not going to have social workers protect you when there's a home invader and you need armed resistance against that invader. A social worker's not going to talk a murderer out of killing someone. I wish I actually had more stats up here because I want to show you the stats. Like, 911 response times in some of these inner cities are atrocious. Like, Let me look up something real quick. Maybe I can find it. Let's see. Because I know I can find certain specifics. I know Detroit used to be better, but Detroit used to be bad. They used to have 911 responses over 50 minutes. And actually, here's a good map, too. See, a lot of this, too, is not even specified. Like, this is over 15 minutes for a 911 response in parts of Detroit. And as you can see, like, as you get kind of toward the downtown, generally, you get lower response times. But once you get, like, kind of more on the outskirts, which is where you'd have the problems, you get these slower response times for 911. And here's less urgent calls, which is more than, yeah, here we go, more than 53 minutes for a non-urgent call. And that, let's say that's Detroit police. But see, this is urgent. This is like, there is a murderer in my house, urgent, and it takes the cops 15 minutes. In 50 minutes, over 50 minutes for a non-urgent call. Like, I live in a small town, right? And we've had to call cops for non-urgent reasons for specific things. We've gotten response within 10 minutes. Well, within 15. 53 minutes. That is atrocious. And then here you got like 43 something, and then you got 30 or 43, and then here you got less than 30. And of course, all the best spots are closer to downtown because that's just how it works. But, I guess just end with this, like, let's have a positive vision for what we want to do, where we want to be in, let's say, 10 years, because it's so hard to kind of plan for like 50 years in advance. Let's talk about 10 years. And this is where I would like to see something a little bit constructive. Like, what do you want to see in 10 years in this country? Because that's where we need to be, is looking at the vision that we want for this country. Not just a feel-good thing of we're going to punish the cops or we're going to remove the cops, or just some kind of short-term feel-good thing. Like, because if you asked me my detailed 10-year plan, I could give it to you that just like that. Like, I can lay out everything that I think needs to be done, that I'd like to have done, and why it would work, and, what we would follow up with. And I can think of contingency plans, and, like, there's a lot of things that I think about that I could give you an answer to. So I want that answer from anybody who's still listening. What do you want this to look like in 10 years? In terms of racial integration or racial equality, or even if you want to go into racial justice, like, what do you want this to look like in 10 years? And I'll leave you with that. Thanks for listening. God bless.